Sarah is on deck. Good afternoon, Mr. Minkus. If you would, could you please give your full name and go right ahead into your testimony, please?
My name is Leslie Minkus, and as a veteran poll watcher and observer of the 2016, 2018, and 2020 elections, I'm here to testify to what I encountered in the 2020 election as voting irregularities, inequities, lack of transparency, and contested voter results. I'm also here as a veteran, a military veteran, and wish to extend my sincere appreciation to all of our military men and women that serve to keep the United States of America a free constitutional republic, a nation of constitutional laws, checks and balances. And I salute our flag. And to all of our military branches, I say, Semper Fi, always faithful. My professional bio includes 50-plus years in corporate life as Vice President of Finance, CFO, Legal Liaison Officer for worldwide companies and joint venture operations, where I traveled to 28 countries over 13 years, responsible for financial operations, mergers and acquisitions, audits that were both general audits and forensic audits, banking, tax, and legal relationships with barristers, solicitors, and attorneys internationally. Following is my declaration, as well as a copy of my poll observer authorization form, which I brought with me to show you that I was legally responsible as a poll worker. That I was required to present to poll inspectors at each of the poll locations where I was assigned to observe. Also, I have a picture of the Barr Elementary School gymnasium that was a polling location where I served on November the 3rd. The picture is to demonstrate the enormous size of the facility for only one Republican poll observer to watch the voting activity from an assigned seat at the entrance of the gym and not be able to see any of the ballots or the actual processing that was located at the opposite end of the gym. Everybody knows what a school gym looks like, but I thought I'd bring a picture just to make certain that you got it. I served as an official legal observer for the 2020 general election at two different locations. On October 27th, October 29th, I was at the United Methodist Church in Sun Lakes, Arizona. On November 3rd, from 5:30 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. at the Barr Elementary School in Phoenix, and then from 4 o'clock to 7:15 at the Sun Lakes Methodist Church in Sun Lakes, Arizona. While serving as an observer, I personally witnessed the following. Observers were not allowed to talk with poll workers or voters, which was part of the manual that the Secretary of State had put out, which was clear, nor was I able to freely walk around the poll location to observe any of the voting activities, which was contrary to what was in the Secretary of State's manual, indicating that we should be allowed to have access to all areas of the voting to be able to observe them. At the Sun Lakes location, I was seated about 25 feet away from the tabulating machine and the ballot box, the ballot drop box, and I had to ask the poll inspector and had to be accompanied by a poll worker if I wanted to walk around to observe anything, anywhere in the polling locations. In the Barr Elementary School, I was seated about 80 feet from the two tabulator machines and the ballot drop box, and I had to ask the poll inspector, who was at the opposite end of the gymnasium, and I only saw her maybe twice during the time I was there from 5:30 in the morning until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. If I wanted to walk around and I had to be accompanied by a poll worker to observe anything anywhere in the poll location. It appeared to me that almost every ballot, from what I was able to see, that was processed through the tabulator computer resulted in a green light switch being activated, and either the poll worker or the voter had to depress that green light switch for their ballot to process through the tabulator. Okay, so I also was on October 16th, I was also an observer that I went to the Maricopa County Election Center. That was the week after the early voting had started. And I asked to observe the ballot opening. I was asked to observe the ballot opening, sorting, and processing in the center. A point regarding lack of transparency at this facility includes observers were told how the ballot receiving process was supposed to function, but was not shown or allowed to see the mail receiving room operations. The methods used to support the supporting of the various types of ballots, how the various types of ballots were opened and distributed to processors, what the processors did with the various types of ballots, and the security of knowing that all valid ballots reached the tabulating room so that each legal vote was actually counted. While I was an observer there at the facility, where the ballots were received, validated, processed, in the large room that was there that I was seated in, I was about 25 feet away from the closest table where there was supposed to be a Republican and a Democrat sitting at the table, but who knew? I mean, nobody knew who was actually at the table because you couldn't see any credentials for anybody there. The room was large enough to hold 110 ballot processors, and the closest one that I was near was 25 feet away, so I wasn't able to really see much of anything. I was not allowed to talk to or ask any questions of anyone other than the assistant director of the facility, which I saw maybe 2 or 3 times throughout the entire day that I was there from 9 in the morning till 5 in the afternoon. There was a young Asian man in the facility talking with the assistant manager at the same time that I was out in the corridor that I briefly met and asked him what his role was, and he replied that he was a computer programmer at the facility. Well, I didn't think much about it until afterwards when I heard the news and I heard about the allegations that China was heavily involved with the ballot tabulating company and the software. I started to think about, gee, that's really unusual that we had an Asian gentleman that was there that was in the programming process. So I just thought it was kind of unusual, and I mentioned it in my affidavit that I had put in. Okay, finally, following the election, I was asked to come to the Arizona GOP office in order to be able to investigate some of the complaints that were coming in from voters. And I spoke with around 35 Republican voters that complained about their ballot issues of processing through the tabulating machine that they personally experienced on Election Day. Then they signed declarations under penalty of perjury that I actually went out, saw them, and talked to them, and asked them if they would be willing to sign those affidavits, that they had to push the green button on the tabulation machine since the poll worker told them to do so, but didn't tell them that the machine rejected their ballot and what options they had to correct their ballots by having the ballot spoiled and redoing it again. So they just thought that pushing the green button was required to process their ballot through the tabulation machine. A sign of voting irregularity and voter inequity. Thank you. That concludes my testimony today.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Minkus, when you were at the center, you noticed this green button. Can you explain to us what the green button is, and was it on every machine?
It wasn't at the center that I observed the green button. It was while I was a poll observer.
When you were a poll watcher at the voting location.
At the poll
Okay,
location.
well, explain to me the green button.
The green button is a button that's labeled CAST.
CAST, C-A-S-T?
C-A-S-T. It is a triangular-shaped button, and there is another button that's on the machine right next to it, which I believe is a rectangular-shaped button, that was a button that was used for other issues, but it wasn't for casting the ballot. If they wanted to reject the ballot, they pushed the rectangular button, and they would reject the ballot. So, as I understand it, the reason that the green light would show up is because the machine wasn't accepting the ballot. There was some issue with the ballot. Now, whether there was a smudge, whether there was an improper mark someplace, whether there was an overvote, an undervote, or whatever it may have been, it had rejected the ballot. But I had observed from the distance that I was at that so many times that green button, that green triangular button had to be pushed, that it seemed to me like it was almost a requirement that they had to do that in order to be able to put a ballot through.
And in fact, what happened when you pressed the green button?
Well, the green button did accept the ballot. It pushed it through, but it put the ballot then into a drawer which they noted as drawer number 3, which separated that from the ballots that were accepted, which went into drawer number 1 and number 2. So all those ballots that went in number 3, I don't know what happened to them.
Were they put aside for further inspection?
I don't know, because these ballots then were all taken. This was on election day, naturally, that this became an issue. And all these ballots then were, at the end of the day, taken out of the machines. They were put into box or boxes.
Special boxes just for them? For number 3?
I don't know if the drawer number 3 went into a special box, because I wasn't able to observe that.
I see.
And get close enough to see that. But I know that the ballots then were all supposed to be taken to another location where it was a central location in the East Valley in Arizona, where they were going to be picked up by a white panel truck. And again, I did not follow that because the inspector, who was a Republican, indicated that she was going along with it and she was going to follow it. But I do understand that during the time that I served as a poll inspector in the early election period, that there were times during the day, it usually was like about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, where a truck would come, a van-type truck, a panel truck, would come to the poll location. There were 2 representatives that would come in that had name tags on them. They would then take the ballots, and I happened to follow that out. They would take the ballots, put it into a box, a plastic box, and they would take them out to their truck. Well, in one case, I followed them out just to see what was going on, and I noticed that the truck that they had a California plate on it, so I thought that was kind of unusual, and I questioned about that, but I understand that they were renting trucks locally, so there could have been that there were enough people moving from California that were using those trucks that were here, and they wound up...
Are you referring now just to the ballots that were the subject of the green button that went into number 3?
These were just...
all the ballots?
These were all the ballots. They were ballots coming out of the ballot box and ballots that were coming from out of the machines.
And the green ballots were taken along with them?
Yes.
Okay. And now you also said that... Well, how many ballots approximately do you think were cast that way, that you observed?
Well, in each day, when I was there prior to the actual election day, there were probably several hundreds to thousands of people that filed through that particular...
How many?
Several hundreds to 1,000 people that filed through that particular polling location.
Right.
Yeah. On election day, there was probably over 1,000 people that came through there.
So total of about
A couple thousand, yes.
2,000, 3,000 people?
Yes.
And when you were at the Maricopa County election facility, where the ballots were received, validated, and processed, you were seated 25 feet in front of a room with 110 ballot processes. Could you see anything?
No. I mean, I could see the people, I could
No,
see
but
the room.
could you observe signatures or
Not at all.
envelopes?
They would not allow us to go beyond. I was sitting in a seat, and there was a pathway that was in front of me where they would actually bring the carts in that had the ballots in them in mail containers, and they would just go through that long aisleway and set them off on the side. Other than that, I was not able to talk to anybody. I was not able to see anything. I was not able to examine anything. So as a poll observer, I was really hindered by just being there and not being able to talk to anybody or see anything.
And what were they physically doing with the ballots?
Well, they were sitting at the tables. Again, there were 110 of them, so they were spread throughout.
110 tables.
Yes.
And how many observers?
And I would say the room was probably as large as this room.
How many observers? Republican observers?
Well, I was the only.
You were the
I was
only
the only poll
Republican
observer on the Republican side. While
For
I was
110
there, 110
tables.
processors.
110 tables?
No, 110 processors.
On how?
2 at a table, so there were probably about 55 tables.
55 tables, 110 processes.
And I was the only Republican observer.
And you have only 2 eyes, right?
Unless
you
I'm
weren't
wearing
selected
unless I'm wearing
because
my
you have
glasses.
more than 2 eyes.
Unless I'm wearing my glasses.
Well, then you have 4. Okay. So, I mean, you couldn't see anything.
No, could not see anything.
They could have been putting phony ballots in, and you wouldn't have known the difference.
Absolutely, it could have been.
Right? They could have been stuffing the ballot box.
Yes.
You're supposed to be there in order to make us comfortable
Yes.
that didn't happen.
Yes, sir.
Because mail-in balloting is prone to that kind of fraud.
That's exactly right.
So they completely frustrated you in your mission to do that. How many ballots? Now you have 55 tables, got 110 employees. We got one Republican, Mr. Minkus. You must have felt a little uncomfortable as to one Republican. Did you have your MAGA hat on?
Yes, and as I had asked the assistant manager there a couple questions as she came in and out 2 or 3 times throughout the entire day, I had asked her how many ballots they were actually processing. She said that they had about
enough to catch up?
2.8 million ballots that they were expecting to process during that election period. I think there was a 14-day period, and there would be about a little over 100,000 ballots a day that were going through there.
So those people were calculating, tabulating, checking out about 100,000.
They were moving very quickly.
Approximately 100,000 ballots.
They were moving very quickly to
without
get over
any observation by Mr. Minkus, who was the only Republican there.
Exactly.
And did you raise an issue about that?
No, I didn't, because I didn't know whether anything that was going on there was proper or not proper. I was only there for 1 day, and I was just observing to see what questions I did want to ask, of which I asked a few questions, as well as that I realized that I was not able to actually see the process coming where the trucks come in, unload the ballots, see what was going on in the mailroom, how they process through the ballots.
It was just 1 day of that? 1 day?
I was there for 1 day.
And about 100,000 votes a day.
Yes, correct.
And then you mentioned that 35 people signed under penalty of perjury. Something about the green,
Yes.
the use of the green button. Would you explain that one more time so I get it right?
Yes. After the election was over with, the Arizona GOP had received many, many calls and complaints from voters about the fact that they felt that when they checked, their ballot hadn't been counted. So they were wondering what happened to it. So they wanted to know how they can check to see if their ballots were actually counted or what happened to them. As a result of that, the Arizona GOP had asked for volunteers to come in to make calls back to these people, these voters, to find all over the valley to find out what the issues were that they had encountered. What I had uncovered that I just testified to was that many of these people that I talked to, there were at least 35 of them, for which I actually went out and picked up their affidavits. So I was able to talk to them not only the phone, but talk to them person to person, that they had told me that the experience they had was that they brought their ballot up to the machine, they put it into the machine, the poll worker that was there, when the green light went on, the poll worker that was there told them to push the green button. And they did. And the machine accepted their ballot. But yet it wasn't counted.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Is that you, Mr. Roberts, or Mr. Cook? Mr. Cook, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is to clear something up for us here from your testimony, sir. Okay. I don't know if anybody else noticed, but there were 3 drawers, and I'm confused. What do we need 3 drawers for? So my question is, the 2 drawers that were there, how were those ballots separated and why? Were votes for the presidential candidates, were they separated by that? For 2 drawers, was they separated for the county supervisor races? Why was there a need for 2 drawers if the ballot went through the machine, everything was good? Why 2 drawers? Do you know the answer to that?
No, I don't. But if you go on to the Secretary of State's website and take off the 2020 general election manual, it tells you in there how those machines were set up, and it explains to you what those 3 drawers were.
Okay, thank you. Next question I have was that, did you witness in any of your, and thank you for your work, by the way, did you witness anything like the testimony we have heard today where the lowering of standards on the site for signature verifications for any mail-in ballots, were those standards lowered at that site by any individual?
I did not observe that, so my answer to that would be I don't know.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Minkus, well, just to tack on to what Representative Cook was just asking, you stated earlier that you were not allowed to see the receiving process of those ballots. Does that include the signature verification? Is that what you were referring to earlier?
I wasn't allowed to see any part of the receiving process where the trucks would come to the building, they would be unloaded, they would go into the mail receiving room. The mail receiving room should have been able to separate the ballots by whatever method they would use to separate them. They were then supposed to go through a slicing machine. And these were things that I was told, but we were not actually able to see them.
No, when you, if I may continue, when you say that you were told, because you also said something earlier that you were not allowed, you participated in 2016, 2018,
Correct.
and now 2020.
Yes.
And that some things changed from 16 and 18. I assume there's always going to be some minor changes here and there. But you said that you're not allowed to talk to them and you're not allowed to walk around the polling place, which was contrary to the policy set forth by the Secretary of State.
Exactly.
So were you given any reason as to why you were being told on the day of implementation of these policies why you were not allowed to do what was set forth in those policies as far as seeing the receiving process, as far as, you know, you're there obviously to observe.
Yes.
Were you given any, you said that you were prevented. How were you prevented? What did they say to you? And did they give you a reason as to why you couldn't do that?
The inspector at each of the polling locations, after I would come in and I would show them my official credentials, they would then give me instructions, and this went on in both locations that I served at, where the inspector would tell us that here's the seat where you can sit, and you can't walk around and talk to any of the poll workers or any of the voters. And if you do want to go any place in the facility, in the polling location, that you have to ask me first, and I will assign a poll worker to you for you to be able to walk around with. Now, that's contrary to the observers' information that was on the 2020 general election manual that was put out by the Secretary of State, which said, if an observer arrives at the voting location, the inspector should, number one, welcome the observer and thank them for their service. Number two, instruct them that they can observe operations but must maintain at least a 6 foot of physical distance from voters. Number three, work with the observer to find a few optimal locations in the vote center that allow for observation without impeding the flow of operations. That's it. But I was told by the inspectors at each location that I must ask them for permission, and they must have a poll worker walk around with me.
Were you not considered a poll worker?
No, no.
You're a poll observer.
The poll observer, watcher observer, is separate from poll worker.
Okay. One last question, Mr. Chairman. So from 2016 to 2018 to 2020, again, you stated there was changes. Was there anything else that stood out in 2020 as far as the changes from your experience from the prior two election cycles, as far as new rules and things?
An unfriendly environment.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Minkus, forgive me, but I'd like to expand on that a little bit. Unfriendly compared to previous years?
Yes.
And unfriendly, how so?
As a Republican poll worker, which I had a badge that I had to wear that said that I was a Republican poll observer, I felt intimidated by if I was walking anywhere in the facility, even to go to the bathroom, some of the poll workers would they'd kind of be intimidating. They'd be if I made a nice gesture or comment to them, I wouldn't get any kind of return back to that extent. If you're having a good day, something of that nature. It was a rather intimidating, unfriendly environment.
So a failure to be cordial.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much. Senator Borelli.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Minkus, now, were you a volunteer, or were
Yes,
you
sir.
getting paid for that?
No, I was strictly a volunteer.
So you did that completely out of patriotism and no pay, and yeah, no good deed goes unpunished, right? Now, did the Democrat poll, the other folks,
No,
your counterpart,
I had
did they have a badge
I had a
also?
selfish motive for doing what I did, and that is to save this country.
Yes, sir. Now, your counterpart, did they also have a badge that identified Democrat?
Some of them did, some of them didn't. So it wasn't consistent.
But you were...
They all had to come in with an identification. The Republicans were one color, the Democrats were another color. When I was at the election facility there for the short period of time that a Democrat was there, which they came in like about 2 in the afternoon and they stayed till from 2 to like 4 in the afternoon. There was a Democrat there. She was sitting right next to me. The extent of the conversation I had with her started and ended with the fact that the Democratic office in Phoenix was destroyed sometime during the year by one of their workers. And I didn't know anything about it, frankly, but she went on and talking about it like that was the only thing that we ever got a chance to talk about. So, yeah, it was an environment that was not. I didn't really feel warm as a volunteer to actually feel like I was being accepted and being welcomed to be doing what I was doing.
One more question. You're a veteran, sir?
Am I a military veteran?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, I am.
Okay.
I made that.
What era?
I was in during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you for your service, sir. And I beyond your military service,
I'm sorry?
beyond your military service, sir,
Yes,
it's
sir.
people like you that make this country work. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
All right, our next witness, and I know, I'm very sorry that we have, it's been such a long day and we've had a number of witnesses that have had to go to work and have had to leave. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes. If I call your name and you're not here, we'll go on to the next person, but we're going to try and work through this entire name list. The next individual up is Diane Sarah.